I kind of call this the success and persuasion matrix for 2024.
Hey, this is Blake Sloan. I've been selling real estate over 14 years. Our team of highly trained professionals, along with our unmatched marketing, has sold thousands of homes here in the Myrtle Beach area, and this is how we do it.
I'm just looking at what our struggles that we're having right now across the board and what can really help. And how do you level up in 2024 overall? Let's look at the one thing that separates the ones from the top and the ones from the bottom, and even other ones that are beating us and everywhere else, right? Real estate right now is becoming more what Nate calls player versus player than ever. What do you think that means? There's somebody else that's coming after your clients right now. We talked about 2 weeks ago, we talked about what we talked about the market was doing, was compacting, right? It was getting smaller. I saw an AR lost 6,000 agents in November, what some article got an email yesterday said, right? Which is not that many, but you're going to see that continue to happen, especially in December. But what's happening is as this contraction in the market happens, you're seeing more pressure. And so what you're seeing is your player versus player, meaning there's somebody else at a different company right now who's calling the same leads that wants to eat more than you do. And so what's happening is you see that middle market share is going away. Some businesses are up significantly, right? Some are down dramatically. And same thing here in this office, right? You see that with some people. Some businesses down significantly. Some people's business is up, right? What's the main difference in what that is? At least in my understanding of this is it comes down to one thing. It comes down to standards. What do you think that means? Standards. That's the way you put it. So for that person, let's simplify that. What does that mean? The standard which people has in 2024 that's acceptable to you. And I struggle this with as a leader, right? Like how to have some people that does great. Like for example, right? Their standard is what usually? 50 deals a year, right? Right around there. 45, 50. If you came and you sold less than 40 deals a year, how would you feel? So what happens is that 40 to 50 deals a year becomes what? Standard of what's acceptable for them. And that standard carries when? The entire year. And so I want you to understand that you're going to get the results based on what your minimum standard is. And so how do I fix that? I have to level up the way I measure what my standard is. I'll talk about that in a second. But you need to level up your minimum floor or standard. And so you're going to get what your standard is. So same thing, right? Why do we have people who sell 1 or 2 deals last month, but they're only here till 2 or 3 o'clock, right? Or their show ratio to the huddle is 40%. It comes down to what? Standard, right, of what's acceptable. And so if you investigate anything from 2023 to make adjustments to 2024, the simplest, biggest place to create leverage is going to be in standard. Same thing. If I'm a listing partner, my standard, right, what my conversion rate is going to make or break the change I make or not, right? And if I'm super pissed off about what my standard is, I don't let that happen, then what do? I fix it. I find a way to fix and understand what needs to happen to get the conversion up. Whatever it is. And so it's very important at all levels this happens. And so it all comes down to your floor. Second piece is your belief. Why do some people fall behind and have low numbers? It comes down to their belief. And I notice this a lot when I do awards for the end of the year, and I look at the salesperson of the month every year. It's usually the same people. Why? Just standard. Right? They live by a standard that's higher than others. And it comes down to their measuring stick. And how they measure those things, right? And so I want you just to investigate that into 2024. Like, look, what are my standards in 2023 as I look back? And I want you to investigate that a little bit. Because that's the main separator of anybody. It's not the scripts, right? It's not the presentation. It's just their standard of what is acceptable for them in their life. The higher it goes, the more results you have. And so what's happening is as this market has shifted, it's really exposing those that can get by with low standards. You with me on this? This is how I show up to meetings, how I show up to huddles. Do I show up to meetings to want to learn and actually take notes from it? Do I go to my Thursday role plays on the seller and buyer side to get better? Right? Those are things that really matter, and it comes down to the standard piece of it. Right? All the way down to CRM handling, to my notes handling, all that stuff, what makes or breaks the difference in that scenario. Third piece here is my standards for money. For some people, that standard is acceptable to have $10,000 in the account. For other people, it's not acceptable to have less than $100,000 in the account. Right? It all comes down to what standards I have, and overall the tool that I use to measure. The way to level it up is I level up the units in which I measure. Does that make sense? So instead of thinking of thousands, I now think of what? 10,000s, right? And I never let anything get below that standard, what that is acceptable to me, either on the spending money side or the earning money side. And what happens in this business is people with low standards that came from a life or a job, whatever it was, that didn't have a whole lot, and all of a sudden you get 10,000 in the bank, 20,000 in the bank, whatever it is, and all of a sudden what happens? A lot of them get comfortable. And they just sit back and they coast, right? Instead of doing what? Leveling up the standard of what that is. And like your example, you may have to find a deeper why for that, right? Like I was working hard for many, many years for a kid I didn't have. And now I had a kid, and guess what? I look back and feel like I didn't work hard enough. Which is crazy. Why? Because I still feel vulnerable in that scenario, right? Real estate could change, things happen, all kind of whatever it is. I look back and could play much bigger. And so it's all important to understand and really investigate what that standard is for me, either spending or saving. He just talks about, I got this from something that the measuring piece, Mosey talked about that. What rich dads teach their children is they have higher units of measurement in their life. Poor dads, if you've seen the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? Poor dads teach their kids lower units of measurement. Does that make sense to you? And so what happens is if you have the higher standards that are given to your entire life, or you create that, everything's much higher. And he gave an example like on Wall Street, they call these things a stick. A stick in Wall Street is $1 million. That's all they really talk about. So their standard's so high in Wall Street, right? They talk about millions. That's all they even talk about. They say, give them a stick. And that measuring stick is $1 million. And so for us, you understand, like, for me in 2024, what's my standard going to be? If I'm below what my standard is, what I got to do? I fix it, right, based on what my scenario is inside, which could be conversion, right, my show ratio, my discipline, whatever it is. There's usually something that's missing if I'm not the top of the top. If I'm not number one, then I want to do what? Understand what standard I'm missing that's keeping me from being number one. Are you guys with me on that? Super simple. That's the kind of basic part. Second piece here, which I think is the key going forward, is this thing of time. This is very similar to that units of measurement, but it has to do time. Number one thing that's going to help get more success overall with time is the speed. Speed. What do you think that means?
How fast you respond.
Speed response is super important, right? If the consumer works for you and it takes a day to respond, are they going to feel very confident in you? Yes or no? No, not at all, right? But if the consumer works for you, it takes minutes to respond, how confident they feel in you? Super confident, right? And this is something I had to work on myself where as I got busier and I learned to discipline other parts, I would tend to have a slower response time, which is not good in sales. And so you want to make sure that you're understanding that speed of response is super key. And it's a huge point of leverage in 2024. Why is that? Because as we're in a market that's contracting, right, there's more pressure on the agents to respond to get through this squeeze of the next 2 or 3 months. And so if I'm going against player versus player, other agents, other companies, call my people, we're getting the same lead pool, right? People are out there searching multiple sites. It's very competitive. What I need to do? Level up the way my speed is response, the way I talk to them, the way I operate in general. The speed's super important. You guys with me on this? And it just goes to example, like I can go deeper on this, but let's say you message somebody back and forth about something 5 times, right? So I send a message to respond to me in a day, right? Sends me a message back, I respond in a day. And we do that back and forth 5 times each. That took how long? 10 days, right? 10 days. And so what happens is that task took 10 days to knock out. But if I respond in 30 minutes, we go back and forth, right? In that scenario, we get the same result in 5 hours. Are you guys with me on this? And so we can knock out the same thing that takes 10 days in 5 hours because all about their speed response and how I operate. Very, very important piece, right? That's how speed you can defy gravity, right? It talks about airplanes and how they can defy gravity through what? Speed, right? You get fast enough that you defy gravity by flying through the air in that scenario. And a lot of times if you're operating at a very high speed, it's very difficult to be sad. Very difficult to be unhappy because you're moving so fast and focusing on new things of what you're doing inside yourself and growth. You with me on this? Very important piece there, I think, in 2024. Second piece here, I see this a lot, is measurement of time. So my measuring stick for time needs to be a lot more dialed in. Most people don't have the calendar dialed in. The time usage, right, is very, very different all across the board based on the agents. I want you to be obsessed with understanding my time management and tracking everything in 2024. There's just so much time wasted that can be used during money time to make more money at every level of the company. There needs to be an obsession with what? Measuring my time. I want to make $200,000 a year next year. Divide it up by, right, 40 hours, 50 weeks and 40 hours. You figure out exactly what that is. Every task you should do, right, should be that much valuable or more. I can't be out doing it, does not get me paid during that time. Does that make sense to you guys in that scenario? Super important piece there to do in that piece of it. Third thing I talked about is speed of my communication. Obviously, we talked about that a minute ago. I got ahead of myself. Speed of my communication is super important. Consumers right now are craving that speed of communication. Faster lead response time, aka lead submission to lead response. Fast response time to them submitting. I see a lot of this in Boomtown. They submit for a property inquiry and we don't answer until like the next day. Right? Well, by then they've done what? Gone to Zillow, click one button, and already had it 2 agents call them, including a concierge from Zillow that gets them on the phone and connects them with somebody else. And that's why they don't want to talk to you anymore. Right? You have to understand the world that we're living in has to have speed of response and speed of communication. To our sellers, right? Very, very important. A lot of our sellers, we talk to them, go into the abyss, we don't talk to them, all of a sudden they come listen with somebody else. Right? It's all about that speed of communication, which they crave right now overall in that scenario. And that's the micro part of this. The macro part of this, understanding time in the long term. Meaning that wealthy people understand time for the long game. They measure things in decades, not days. What do you think that means? They measure things in decades, not days. They understand and playing the long game. This business is a game you have to play the long game in. As you do it more, guess what happens in the business? It becomes easier, right? Through past clients, through referrals, through your skill set, through your mindset, right? The shit that used to bother you from a capacity standpoint 2 years ago no longer bothers you, right? 2 years later. But all of a sudden now, if you do it right, you have a lot more past clients, a lot more referrals, and so the business compounds on itself, and so you have to be willing to play the long game. And one of the things I was studying, got from, talked about a little bit of this, is there's a study called the marshmallow study. So the children that could wait longer for more marshmallows were more successful in life. Why? They understand the value of delayed gratification, right? It's super powerful. That's one thing I got from years ago. He was my coach. He said, you live a few years of your life like no one else so you can live the rest of your life like no one else. And what that means is you do what? You sacrifice for a certain period of time and double down and work hard and do the right things at the right time. And you, especially early in your career, right? And you hammer that down. And all of a sudden you build something that has momentum that allows you to have flexibility in things in your life later on. But it all comes down to consistency. Most people try to jump to the quick buck and don't play the long game. What happens is they don't delay gratification. They want to cut the corners. And all of a sudden they don't have the long-term effect and they don't have the long-term success or wealth in that scenario. Does that make sense? And so I want you guys to understand, especially in a market that has contraction, right, that we're seeing the squeeze on, the next 2 or 3 months will be difficult. But if you get through that, then guess what happens? I want you to play the long game when there's a lot less realtors and it's going to be a lot different and a lot easier to make a lot more money, especially if rates come back down. Does that make sense to you guys in that scenario? And if they don't, just say the rates stay the same, you get through the next 3 or 4 months, there'll be a lot less competition because the weak ones get weeded out, which is what we want. Then all of a sudden you have a lot more that you can pick up from a goal standpoint that other people left around. A lot more past clients that are still out there, right, that no longer have people to work with, that you're able to get up in that scenario. Questions about that? Third piece of this, which is super important. Conviction. Number one sales hack is conviction. What do that means?
How much you believe it.
How much you believe it, right? I notice this a lot. Some of the reasons we're not having conversion is we're saying the words, but guess what's happening? There's not belief behind it. So guess what happens? The consumer doesn't believe it, right? On the listing side and buyer side. And it comes down to tonality issue to talk about. So the first piece I want you to understand is understanding the belief that you have overall in what you think the first one is.
Yourself.
You. Now, This is something that must be built from the inside out. The first thing, belief is you. So here's the part. How do I get belief? So here's the thing. Some of the reason that you don't have conviction in the phone is because you don't do what? Believe in you. And you haven't practiced enough to understand that you need to believe in you and what you have your skill set. Even to the market change. Okay? In every single level. Or your belief in you or your ability to get the property sold, your belief to help them get the right property, whatever it is. And you have to do this through what? Through basically the inside out. Like I said, through practice at every level. Here's the deal. Our competitors, guess what they're doing every day? Practicing at every single level. Dudes that are selling 100 homes, 200 homes, other companies that do a lot of properties, guess what they're doing? Practicing. I don't know. I see it online. I see a bunch of them. They're practicing at every level, right? It's one of those things you got to make sure you have belief in you. Second piece, you need to make sure you have belief in what? Product. Make sure you understand that, hey, look, what do we really have here overall? Which I think is super important for us to realize. Oh, I forgot the computer's turning. They can't see now. Very important for us to understand here, right, that the product piece of what we have is different. If you're brand new, you don't really know any better. You think this is like, oh, okay, this is what they have here. But if you've been somewhere else, they don't really have shit, right? What did you have last place? From a product standpoint.
3-ring binder.
Right? That's about it. The one thing that we had, the guy who was helping on the listing side, he's like super excited because he's never seen some shit like this before. But he's worked at multiple other places. And so that natural conviction, you can just see it in the energy with people and how they operate. Right? Because there's excitement about it and doing the work and learning about it and coming in and practicing about it so you can master the product piece. And that's super important to make sure you have conviction in that overall. Third piece we mentioned is belief. Belief in the product here. I have product broken down in two things. So product here is what? This is Myrtle Beach. Right? If you're buyer side. Also belief in the system. That's our system. Right? What we have, how it's different. And like overall, if you look at us compared to other trainings, other places, right? It's a lot deeper, a lot more sales psychology, a lot more higher end stuff that I've never really seen anywhere else. At least when I was at other places, we had a sales meeting like once a month, and they didn't teach it, right? You're expected to go learn at the CCR with some course that everybody can get for $99. It doesn't teach you anything. Why? It's not different because everybody's got it. So it's important to understand that, hey, look, we have something here that's special, and you want to remind yourself about that all the time. Okay? Because that conviction is what moves them in that scenario, right? Overall in that scenario. Fourth piece I had here is that conviction is created from within. And I want you guys to understand when you have that conviction, you're willing to fight for the prospect. And I want you to think prospect versus check. Prospect versus check. And so what it comes down to is you're saying the words, but what's happening? In many cases.
You don't believe
The client doesn't believe it. Listing side, seller side. I'm sorry, listing side, buyer side, both things, right? Why would somebody who we show something to and what we have in the piece, who understands what we have, list with somebody else who's only sold 3 houses? What do you think the difference is?
Yeah, more conviction.
Conviction, period, right? What they believe from the person's standpoint. And so it just comes down to that scenario. You want to live in a place where, like, you want to have everything like a referral. So if somebody refers something to you, right, and they refer you to go to a place, you go to that place because what? You believe what they tell you. And so we need this, make sure that and here, how do we measure this? And I'll talk about this in the next piece, but how do we measure conviction? You can actually measure that. But I want you guys to make sure you're aware of that you keep that. But I think what happens with us is we do so many times, day in, day out, that it becomes normal to us. Right? And we don't really expect or think that's that much different until you look at what other people have other places. Does that make sense? Like when I did that podcast interview a couple weeks ago, he's asking all these questions, and I'm just talking about normal what we're doing. He's like, this is crazy, and what I think. Well, damn, I thought this is normal what we do, right? And you tend to fall in this place where you forget your conviction. And so you want you to understand what moves clients right now is conviction. It's excitement in that piece. And so sometimes you have to go find a way to manufacture that in 2024 because they're going to just go with what their gut feeling says. No matter how good the script is, no matter how good your presentation is, no matter how good your objection handler is, guess what happens? They got to be able to feel it. So it's very, very important to understand that piece. Right? I was thinking about that in the middle of the night for some reason. Some people haven't ever seen the beach, and they're 40, 50 years old, right? Never even seen it before. And I met them on my timeshare tours, and I was like, this is crazy. They've never even seen the beach before. And they spend their whole life dreaming about it, and like we live it every day. And so what happens is we don't carry that conviction that we should. And so I want you to kind of check yourself and say, when I'm face-to-face with clients, when I'm on the phones, do I have the conviction about how good it is what we have? How do I measure that? My tonality. How do I measure that? Record it, dude. Everything. Your presentation, what's happening is you're saying the words, there's no conviction behind it. You're saying the words, and you got to be able to go back and listen to yourself in that scenario. And I talked about this on a separate thing the other day on our warrior call. We talked about sometimes you got to be willing to climb the mountain of cringe, meaning that you got to do what? Go back and listen to yourself, right? If I listen to myself, it's going to make me cringe and be terrible, but you got to be willing to do that to do what? Get better. But half of us listen to our presentation, we sound flat. Listen to your listening side of the presentation, flat. Objection handling, flat. Buyer side, flat. Heard on the phone a lot this morning already, a couple of times. There has to be some tonality that brings them in that scenario. So the first thing, tonality of connection. It's more important than ever right now because the marketplace used to be transactional. As the market has shifted, it's less transactional, more what? Relational. Relational. Meaning that I have to have a deeper connection if I know in a marketplace that's more relational. You guys with me on this? Very important piece there overall in that scenario. Second piece I mentioned this earlier, your tonality of conviction. I want you to record that and score yourself. Super important piece here. If you want to win going forward. This is at every level in our company right now. That we've got to make sure that we're understanding in that scenario. Third part, I got ahead there, is it needs to be measured. Measured. What's my tonality like on my phone calls? I don't need to hear the other side of the conversation, right? Hear the overall phone tonality. If I'm face-to-face, I want to have my phone recording so I can go back and listen to what I miss. If I didn't get a listing, right, I go back and listen. What's my tonality look like? What's my conviction? Do I sound excited about this? If I don't, no wonder they didn't list with me. I have the best system, the best scripts, the best presentation in the world, but if there's no conviction behind it, they're not signing with me. Period. Right? And so it's important to understand that's how people make decisions in that scenario. And I want you to go back to this part here. The last one I have on here is skill versus heart. What do you think that means? Skill versus heart. You have the best skill in the world, but if you know the heart behind it, it doesn't matter. There's two types of heart here. There's a heart of connection, right, which is helpful, but I can be really connected to my people, but not excited about it, and what happens? They're not going to list with you or buy with you. They feel connected with you, but guess what? You're not having an excitement or energy that makes them want to move forward with you. Does that make sense? They like you, have a great connection. Well, hey, things went great, and all of a sudden you leave, and what happens? Connection's gone, and they go with somebody else who has conviction and energy that's moved them forward to where they want to go. Why? Because they want to follow somebody with energy, right? That's conviction, what they do. And so it's important for us to understand, hey, here's the key part. I wrote this down in my notes here, is the way you're saying it makes it believable. Or the way you're saying doesn't make it believable.